From the Battle of 300 to modern day, war and technology have always been closely intertwined. What is it about war that causes us to unite? For example, how does a silversmith organize an entire militia within 7 hours to defeat a trained British army in the Battle of Lexington? Or how does a toy manufacturer change the course of World War II? How is it that one sentence can unite an entire nation in writing the greatest story of faith, politics, and science ever, landing a man on the moon? There's something else going on here, and I reason that if you can deconstruct war and innovation into its smallest components, you can understand why it's such a fertile ground for invention, and you could reverse engineer the impact of war. So I started studying by collecting lists of inventions, and what I initially found is that every invention has a story. Every story has a team of characters, and every team of characters has a leader. I've been asking the wrong question. When before I was asking, why does war accelerate innovation? What I should have been asking is, who accelerates innovation, and how do they do it? So I started looking through the same exact stories, but this time I had a lens on who are the teams, who are the characters behind them. And what I found were 3 patterns that all great leaders use to bring ideas to life. And they just so happen to be almost the exact opposite of what we use during peacetime. I call it the Delta engine because when you use it as a lens into the past, you can understand why success happens so much more clear. But when you use it as an approach to the future, you can create the delta, the change that you want to have on the earth. So I'll explain the terms quickly. Cause. This is your one meaningful, focused vision that's so clear anyone can repeat it back to you. Context is understanding self, understanding other, and the environment in between. And connect is connecting with people outside our perspectives and different socioeconomic backgrounds back to our cause. Think of it like this. Cause is your fuel, context is your roadmap, and connect are the people that you take with you on your journey. And nowhere in history is there a better example of connecting than the story of the Revolutionary War. Has anyone ever heard of William Dawes? Most people haven't, but Paul Revere wasn't the only one to go on the midnight ride. There are other riders dispatched that night, and William Dawes was one of them. So why don't we talk about William Dawes in elementary history class? The answer's simple. On William Dawes' midnight ride, no one showed up. On the other hand, Paul Revere was able to connect entire militia within 7 hours. So if you do the math there, that's humanly impossible. There were no group texts, no Facebook messages, no emails, save the dates. So let's think about how he did this. Let's take the Delta engine on a trial run here. To understand how Paul Revere did it, you'd have to understand who he was. So Paul Revere was just a silversmith, but as it turns out, he was so much more. He was a hunter and a fisherman. He was a politician and a bar hopper. He was a theater lover and a gambler. The key here is he was connected with the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, all the same. So when Paul Revere went on his midnight ride, he didn't go running through the streets screaming the British are coming. That would have been too dangerous. Think about the context of Boston at that time. It was a city that was under martial law. And so it would have been very dangerous to be a rider carrying a message outside. So Paul Revere first had to cross a heavily guarded Charles River. So he waited till 10 o'clock at night on that cold April night in 1775 till the moon was right at the right angle so that he could cross undetected. And then he wrapped his oars with cloth so that he could move quietly. When he got to the other side, a bar buddy of his had left a horse there for him, Paul Revere's horse. And here's the key. When Paul Revere went on his midnight ride, he knocked on the right doors. He knew who the people to connect with in order to spread his message the best. And so those people in turn sent out other writers. Before the end of the night, there were entire networks of people using the same cause as Paul Revere, spreading the same exact message. The legend of Paul Revere lies less in what he was able to accomplish as an individual and more what he was able to do by connecting others. He was just a silversmith, but it was because he connected outside of his industry that he was able to change his industry. So, the way the Delta engine works, if you don't have all the parts moving simultaneously, it won't move forward. You can be the most connected person in the room, have 500 connections on LinkedIn, just be that guy that doesn't have a job, is extremely connected. You have to have all three of these things to move forward. You also have to understand context. Understanding context is understanding self, other, and the environment in between. And key in this is understanding and embracing our own limitations. And there is a story in history where someone was able to use their limitations as an advantage. An unsung hero in World War II named Harold John Turpin. The date is May 10th, 1940. And German troops had just invaded Paris, France. The army was marching under the Arc de Triomphe. But 300 miles away in Enfield, Great Britain, Harold Turpin sat at his kitchen table with the light on, with sweaty palms, trying to design a British submachine gun to protect from invasion. Here's what he was up against. The Germans had the best weapons technology at the time. Their submachine gun was the MP40. It was as elegant as it was complex. The Germans had what we assume to be the recipe for success. They had highly trained citizens, the most advanced technology of today, and entire manufacturing facilities designed to make this MP40. Harold Turpin had a recipe for a problem. He had 0 trained citizens, no manufacturing facilities, and archaic technology. But what he did have is a deep understanding of context and ability to embrace his limitations. So Harold John Turpin designed the most simple submachine gun to date, the Sten 1 machine gun. It basically looked like an exhaust pipe with the trigger on it. He still had a problem, though. No one could make his gun. So he called up a buddy of his named Walter Lynes. Now, Walter Lynes was the founder of the largest toy manufacturing facility in Great Britain. And he said, "Hey, Walt, I got a deal for you. So you guys are really good at making things with very small parts. What do you think about cranking out a bunch of submachine guns?" So Walter Lynes, whose previous design experience, mind you, includes yo-yos and Noah's Arks, redesigned the Sten 1 machine gun and brought the number of parts from 69 to 47. The Sten 1 machine gun was effectively the exact opposite of the German MP40. Where the MP40 was effective and complex, the Sten gun was cheap and nasty, was 47 parts, and could be created in 5 man-hours. But when it came time for combat, both guns performed equally at close range. And so as it turns out, the Germans don't get outfought in World War II. They got out-manufactured. I'm using the machine gun as an example, but the same is true with tanks and airplanes. Where the Germans were trying to win a gun show, the British just wanted to protect their freedom. And Harold Turpin had a great cause, but it was only because he was able to embrace his limitations and use it, like Paul Revere, as a way to connect with the toy manufacturer. Was he able to achieve his cause? And it's only when we embrace our limitations can we become limitless. So you may have noticed, both of these two things are connected to cause. And if you don't have cause, you basically have nothing. You can have all the people on the bus, and you can know exactly the roadmap that you're going. But if you don't have fuel in your engine, you can't move forward. So I'll give you 2 examples of cause. One in which an agency had lost their cause. Another in which the cause was crystal clear. Both of them from the same exact agency. Can anybody think of NASA's cause right now? Crickets, right? No, we have no clue. But there was a time when anybody could tell you exactly what NASA meant to do. John F. Kennedy said it best in his 1962 speech. He said, "We'll put a man on the moon by the end of the decade." And 7 years later, on July 20th, 1969, Apollo commander Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon. NASA experienced its greatest leap of innovation in this time period, and the narrative of the space race usually goes like this. 3 brave astronauts and our nation's youngest president fly to the moon, winning peace for all mankind. But that's dramatically shortchanging the story. The Apollo landing was basically a miracle, but the miracle lies less in the ingenuity of 3 astronauts and the charisma of the president. The miracle lies in a nation that believed, a nation that cared. It lies in the hundreds of thousands of factory workers that made the part to put the Saturn V rocket up to the moon. They say in the factories in those days, when the 4:30 bell rang, you couldn't tell what time quitting time was because nobody got out of their seats. Everybody spent a little bit longer than they had to make their part a little bit better than it had to be. It was because a nation cared. There's a central theme that connects all these points together, and that is caring. You want to know why? Because it starts with a C. Just kidding. But cause is caring. Cause is caring, and the reason we weren't able to describe NASA's cause is because they haven't given us a reason to care. But John F. Kennedy, on the other hand, created a very clear cause for us to connect with. And he did it because he was able to listen to his nation, but more than that, he was able to feel what they felt. Think about the factory workers at this time. Actually, think about any American. There was some fear going on, wasn't there? I mean, people were building bomb shelters in their backyards. So when we put a man on the moon, it was less about who had the biggest rocket, and it was more about safety and freedom from fear. There's nothing to fear but fear itself. And when those factory workers were making those parts, they weren't just making a piece. They were protecting their nation from freedom. Kennedy gave us a cause worth caring about. So you might be thinking to yourself, the last example had nothing to do with war. That's exactly the point. The space race, in effect, kept the Cold War cold. A nation was able to unite and reverse engineer the impact of war. During that time, we had all of the innovation and none of the war. So my question is this: why conflict? Why violence? Why war? In looking for the answer to why war accelerates innovation, I accidentally found the answer to how all great leaders rise up and make change. And I imagine a world where we don't have to wait for fear and crisis to have this type of impact. Like Kennedy, I imagine a world where we can reverse engineer the impact of war for good. But there's a barrier between us and that world, and we stand toe-to-toe with it every day. For my job, I help companies imagine their future 5, 10, 15 years out. And I do it by connecting them with the people that they serve, consumers, people like you and me. And at the end of our workshop, we'll have tons of ideas lined up on the wall, and everyone is excited, not about their salary, but about the impact they can have on the people they serve. And then I'll call up 2 weeks later, and everyone's completely on board. I'll call up 2 months later, I'll get the same 3 things. Oh, our engineers are a little bit limited. They don't think they can make this. Or not everybody in the organization is bought in. No one really knows what we're trying to do right now. I'll call up 6 months later. I'll get no answer. But then I'll walk by a shelf a year later, and I'll see a product on the shelf that has absolutely nothing to do with what originally inspired everyone. And this breaks my heart. I know I don't want this to happen anymore. So we can make some moves to stop this today. Let's bring this from a history lesson to something that we can apply right now. So we've used this Delta engine so far as an approach to the past, as a lens. And you can use just about any success story and you'll see these same 3 patterns come up again and again and again. But what if we use this as an approach to the future to design the change that we want? In our nations, in our schools, in our lives, in our families, in our governments, like Kennedy, we can create a cause that people care about because we're connecting and listening to them, but more importantly, create a cause that we believe in. For every cause, for every goal that we have, we can take a page out of Harold John Turpin's book, write down all the skills required to bring this cause to life, and write down what are the limitations that we have, what are we not so good at, and use that as an opportunity to, like Paul Revere, connect with people that thrive where we may fall short, but more importantly, connect with people who believe what we believe and care about our cause. So, the future isn't just a place we can go. The future is a place that we can invent together. And it is those who have the vulnerability to understand their limitations, embrace them, that become limitless. Who connect outside of their industry, they're able to change their industry. And those with the cause worth caring about, to challenge us to be more than we can be together, have the power to reverse engineer war and change the world. Thank you.